Good morning. Wow, you can hear me. I can hear me. That's amazing. So it turns out I am actually the CEO of Tlon Corporation. I'm not the CEO of Urbit, as many people have often referred to me as. Tlon was started quite some time ago to move Urbit forward and to figure out what it was for in some ways. But we've never talked about Tlon because a prerequisite to Tlon even mattering was that Urbit could be a community and an ecosystem that was independent of us. And without that fact, it's kind of irrelevant to talk about the company because Urbit is the most important thing. But look at all of these people here and all the things that they're doing. Urbit has very much escaped Tlon, which is always the goal. But now that that's true, I want to talk to you about what Tlon is and how we think about what we do and what we build on top of Urbit. Let's start with something really simple, just to get us all grounded. So where are we? We're in Miami. We're at the second Urbit assembly. It's 2022. And we're somewhere on the timeline of personal computing. For I think a lot of people, this timeline looks like this. We started in the late 60s to figure out how to take mainframes, some of which were probably like the size of this entire parking garage, and turn them into PCs. At first, those things were just toys. They weren't interesting to many people, but we figured out how to make them useful and get them onto pretty much everybody's desks. Then we networked them together. And once we networked them, we figured, okay, these things are pretty useful now that we can connect them. So we figured out how to double down on that. We built servers. And those servers made it possible to connect everybody all the time. But we wanted to be even more connected, so we shrunk the PC, put sensors in it and in our pockets, and now we're connected everywhere all the time. I'm not sure that's a good thing, but I don't think it matters. Because the way that we think about the timeline of personal computing, it looks something like this. The only useful thing that we've learned so far is that network computing isn't going away, that it's something that we depend on, that it's a part of human culture. But we're not locked in to the way that we use our computers because the future is long. We have a long road ahead, and we can still start over. We knew this almost a decade ago, and so we pretty much did start over. Because it was obvious even then that if you change nothing about the way that we compute, it's not going to turn out very well. The future probably looks like this. It looks like a future in which companies control everything about the technology that we use, and in turn, they control the way that we think, the way that we interact, almost everything about our world. In my view, the world is very much shaped by the technology that we use. So, we don't need to spend too much time on it, because we can just say, look, it's the end of an era. From the late 60s until now, it's just computers and beta. It was an experiment. We learned a lot of things, and we can keep the good, and we can get rid of the bad. We can also kind of write the epitaph. It was an incredible experiment that ultimately went horribly wrong when computers started to drive us all crazy. So I think we can also start on the next 50 years of computing. And those, I'm quite sure, are going to be very different. From now and going forward, I believe we're in the process of building computing systems that we can trust. And I think it's not obvious what that actually looks like or what that feels like. We see some of the building blocks of these systems being built with blockchains and protocols. Urbit is obviously a big part of that. But a world of computers that we can trust is very different than the world that we live in now. One example I often think about is what would it look like for me to upload my genetic material to a computer and to not think about it, to actually be excited to learn what a computer could tell me when I put my genome, my most sort of intimate personal details about myself into a machine and it tells me something new. Right now, in order to do that, I have to trust a company. I have to trust that they're going to be around for some period of time. I have to know what they're going to do with that information. So if I had a computer I could trust, I believe that that computing system would become the invisible and ubiquitous fabric of the world. This, I think, is what people want from computers. And I think that if we had machines of that kind, then that digital world would be one that people actually shaped on their own, which means, importantly, that we don't know exactly what it's going to look like. We know that the people who depend on it are going to make it for themselves. So how do we get there? Well, think about it this way. This is Miami. I mean, I don't really need to show it to you. This is Miami. Miami is a very unique place. This is true of all cities. Cities evolve over long periods of time by the people who live in them. Cities are built with things that look like this. They're built with tools. People have been doing this for thousands of years. And the tools that people use to shape the physical environment belong to the people that use them. They don't disappear when a company disappears. They live for a long time. And they can be used in concert in ways that the person who made the tool cannot expect or control. So, what is Tlon? Why does Tlon exist? Tlon has always existed around a simple prompt. Build software that has the simple and straightforward quality of a tool. We build the tools for humanity to be able to compute together. More specifically, we build tools that belong to you, that are simple to use and to understand, and can last for a very long time. This is important. The tools that we make should be able to outlive the company itself, the people that made them. Turns out, if you care about these things, and I do, there's basically no way to do this. It's totally impossible with the technology that we have or with the conventional technology that exists in the world. This was true a decade ago, and for the most part, it's still true. So Tlon had a first relatively ambitious prompt to start. Build a new platform. You need a new system where people can build software that has that wonderful quality that tools have. So that's what we did. We focused entirely on building Urbit. And Urbit is a platform unlike the platforms that we're familiar with. Because Urbit is open, it's collectively owned by the people who use it and depend on it. It's infrastructure that's supported by a foundation to guide it forward. So it's useful to all the people who use it. We wanted to give Urbit away because we knew that if you gave it away, it could actually survive and thrive. But Urbit alone is just technology. Urbit is like the internet or like Bitcoin. On its own, it's not necessarily useful to everyday people. It's not easy to develop on top of. You have to put Urbit to work and materialize its value. And so that's why now we work in large part on Landscape. I'll talk a little bit about how they're related in a minute. Landscape is a suite of what we call digital basics. Very simple, somewhat modular tools that can be used together by users to communicate and collaborate. And it's a powerful framework for developers to be able to extend that toolkit and ship software directly to people. The ethos of Landscape is to give people the tools that they need to compute and let them figure out what to do with them. Let them shape their own digital worlds to be as wildly different as they should be. So, we've been working on these two things, maturing Urbit and overhauling Landscape completely so that we can all move into a different era of computing together. So I'm going to talk to you about what we've been doing on both of these fronts, one by one, starting with Urbit's core development. For those of you not interested in the core platform, you can tune out for 2 minutes. But I think this stuff is important, and I'm sure there are many technical people here for whom it's worthwhile. So I think a lot of people actually don't know this, but for pretty much the entire history of this company, we've always wanted to build basically an OS for day-to-day computing in the cloud. That's actually how we matured and built Urbit. We would sit down, even in 2014, and think, okay, how can we use this thing from day to day? And we'd come up with some sketch of what we wanted to do, and we'd try and do it. And then we'd totally fail. And we went through this feedback loop many times. And it turns out it actually works really well, because every time you have something you want to do with the system, that drives its maturity. So it would make demands of Urbit that we would have to go and fix. Sometimes that would take some time. And once we would fix them and design that system, rework the system, it would broaden the usability that we could deliver to people. So we've been going around in this circle for a while. I'm going to read you something that Philip wrote to the company earlier this year. Urbit cannot succeed unless it's the best software stack for personal computing in the world. Urbit is so good at so many things that the distance from finally barely viable to best in the world is really small. This, I think, has always been obvious to us, but I think the way that Philip puts it here is quite clear. What we've aimed at always is to get to this finally barely viable point, that we could build software on top of Urbit that we weren't embarrassed to tell our friends to use, that we felt like was truly best in class, that was category defining. And once you could get there, we knew we could sort of like complete the entire project. So the essential question for us, which has actually kind of been always the essential question, is really, how far away are we from barely viable? It's kind of the only thing that matters, actually. So let's look back. We'll look at our progress, and we can think about how much we have left. So in 2021, since this assembly was, we're actually like 11 months out. 11 months ago, you couldn't ship software. Updates were a nightmare. We would regularly break a bunch of people's instances. Onboarding was totally, unbelievably expensive, partially for reasons outside of our control, but still. And you would regularly crash the process because you run out of memory. So a year later, well, software distribution is insane. It's amazing. People build stuff we don't even know about and couldn't have thought of. Updates are reliable. The release process actually makes sense. It's about 100, maybe 200 times cheaper to onboard with an L2 that we designed, built, and deployed. And you don't run out of memory, along with a whole other laundry list that we don't need to go through. So the main takeaway is just that Urbit is, at long last, becoming boring, which is exactly what it should be. Because any platform that you can rely on has to be reliable and predictable. So if you look and you see what people are coming up with on top of this still young but maturing platform, Halium, Uqbar, Quartus, Terrell, others in the ecosystem, they're really doing impressive things. And it seems almost like we've hit this mark. Maybe we are already barely viable. We've been doing this for a long time. We're hard on ourselves, and we have a high standard. So we see a few remaining challenges. And it's important to get them out in the open, have everybody be aware of them, especially because we think we can actually do them. So I'll rattle these off pretty quickly. You can come talk to me about them later. Scaling. Urbit doesn't scale the way that it should. It probably couldn't support hundreds of thousands of users today, but we know how we can get there. Security. As you should know, if you don't, Urbit is definitely not secure. You can't put your keys in it, but it certainly can be secure. In fact, it's designed to be able to be audited in a way that should make that very efficient to undertake. Maintenance. Urbit should be able to run forever. It is designed such that you should never have to maintain your Urbit. It should just run on its own. We have to get to zero maintenance. Turns out we know how to get there. Cross-version compatibility, which is a bit of a mouthful, but is super important as well. You have to have nodes that are able to communicate that run different versions of software. And then finally, the developer experience is something that it's surprising that many people suffer through. It can be a lot better. The best thing about this, as Philip articulates, what's unique about Urbit in 2022 is that this list of things is quite short. Each of these, except security, is doable to the barely viable level in months with little implementation risk. This used to be a much longer and much scarier list. I can certainly tell you that if we even tried to make a list like this in, say, 2017, 2016, we wouldn't have even been able to do it. So we went ahead and built the next version of Landscape with the confidence that we can get all of these things done. And perhaps more importantly, we know that if we can pull this off to make Landscape actually a best-in-class, competitive user experience, then there can be another 1,000 landscapes built on top of Urbit that we don't build. So let's talk about Landscape, the thing that we've been driving core development forward with. This is Landscape. Wait, no, this was Landscape, although actually it is Landscape for a little while longer. Most of you are familiar with this. This is the thing that we built over the last couple of years with the primary goal of being able to A, use Landscape from day to day, rely on it completely, and B, let people ship software and customize it. At the end of last year, we realized two important things. First, we realized we liked using Landscape quite a lot. We don't use Signal or Discord or Telegram or whatever. The company lives on Landscape, as do many other communities. And the customizability of it is pretty cool. You can do a lot with it. It's also amazing what people were able to figure out what to do with software distribution. But the other thing we realized is that in order for us to really get behind this thing, it has to be a lot better. From a day-to-day usability standpoint, Landscape is just not good enough. So at the end of the year last year, we basically started rebuilding Landscape from scratch. We felt like there were some core insights that we wanted to keep. The overall structure of the thing is pretty good, but we thought we could make it dramatically better. So this is Landscape and groups. Looks quite similar. That's intentional. We think there's a lot of good things already in there. But we've rebuilt the whole thing to be so much nicer to use from day to day. And today we're going to release an alpha of this next version of Landscape so people can experiment with it and play with it. And actually, I want to show that to you. Because one of the things about Tlon is we prefer to just ship code. We like things that work, people can play with, and we like it when you can read the source. So Marisa, who led the product effort on this, is going to show you this thing. And I don't even have to drive. Come on up.
Let's see. Can you hear me? Okay. When I joined Tlon, Landscape and groups were one thing. And then last year at Assembly, we launched software distribution, and they became two things. And this year, we focused on breaking up groups into modular and interoperable apps, a suite of communication basics, and that's what we're going to look at today. But first, I want to make everyone aware of a new group that we've created called Tlon Public. I know we've been a little bit heads down while we've been working on the alpha, and there's been a bit of radio silence, and so this is meant to remedy that. So here you can see we have, stuff we've been thinking about, stuff we've been working on, but most importantly, we have the instructions for how to get on the alpha and how to use all the products that you'll see here today. So let's get into it. This is Landscape. I followed the instructions. I'm on the home screen. So far, as Galen said, it looks pretty similar, unless we take a look at system preferences, which is no longer a rat's nest. We also have our darling calm engine. Notifications have gotten an update. But most importantly, you'll notice there's a new app here called Talk. And this is actually a major update. What we've done is we've taken all of the functionality from messages and we've moved it out of groups into its own standalone app. And soon we'll do that with Notebooks, our writing app, and with Gallery, formerly known as Collections. And they'll all be interoperable with groups. I'll demonstrate what I mean by that in a second. Let's take a look at groups. So this is groups. This is where you can organize all of your friends, your DAO, your team. Let's see. It's a lot more responsive, and it's just, nicer to use and makes a lot more sense. Wouldn't be a demo, right? Let's see. There we go. Thanks. So this is a talk channel, but as we saw, there is the talk app. So let's take a look at that. This is talk. So far, this is where you can message all of your friends. But as I said, it's interoperable with groups. So let's take a look at what that means. You can see here that we have the filter set to direct messages. But if I go to all messages, you'll see I have all of my talk channels alongside all of my DMs. So we can go back to this, and hopefully, well, we can blame the internet.
There you go.
Still working. So you can talk from talk, you can talk from groups, and let's see. Now you can talk from small talk. We're launching our native iOS mobile application. So you can talk on the go, you can have the notifications. Let's go ahead and send a message to Romy, who, if you don't know her, she's the brilliant mind behind everything graphic at Tlon. She's in Argentina right now. All right. So back to desktop. Let's go ahead and take a look at groups, if I can find my mouse. Here we are. Let's find a new group to join. So you can search by Pat P. This is Liam, our engineer who worked tirelessly on landscape in the Move Away from Graph store. But you can also search by nickname. Believe it or not, you could not do that before. So the groups that you see when you search are ones that are discoverable to anyone on the network. Those are public and private groups. We also have a type of group called a secret group, which you can only see if you've been invited. And so speaking of invites, I have one here. Let's go ahead and join. Great. So this is Gallery. It's a multimedia repository where you can add your images, your links, your photos, video, music. And we also have notebooks, which has gotten an update. Let's add a note since I was added as an admin. Let's see. All right. Let's see if we can get things to update
I think
here.
you're suffering from venue Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I mean, what are you going to do? All right, so that's it. Just a reminder, you can find the link to the Tlon public group in the Secret Society pamphlet that's circulating. You can also find it on tlon.io, and that's where you'll find all the instructions for how to join the alpha. And lastly, but probably most importantly, everything on the alpha will stay on the alpha. So we'll be deleting all of the content, it'll be gone, searched. Think of this space as like, it's a developer alpha, it's a place to play. Yeah, that's it.
Well, importantly, right.
You want to clarify? Yeah.
We'll migrate everything.
What?
We're not going to, the alpha content will go away, and then we'll migrate forward from everything that's already existed to this whole new thing. Anyway, thanks, Marisa. I do hope you'll all spend some time playing with this thing. It is pretty fun. It feels very different. I think it's actually kind of hard to demo it. You have to play with it. So please go and play with it, especially if you're a developer. Go and look at how this thing is built. It's very different from what was built before. And I'll talk about why and where it's going. But I wanted to show it to you actually working, because again, the main thing for us is to kind of move stepwise from working state to working state. Another thing that's important to mention, just as an aside, landscape's not it. In order for people to use this thing, they gotta have a node somewhere. And for us, that means hosting. We're not going to talk a lot about hosting, but we actually do a huge amount of work on hosting to make it scalable and easy for people to access. When the Landscape Alpha becomes Landscape itself, we'll do a bigger announcement around hosting. But for all of you, anyone here, you should know, hosting is actually live right now. So if you're impatient, you got to get on the network, you can go to tlon.network and sign up and get yourself a ship right away. There's a discount code in that same Secret Society pamphlet. But let's talk a little bit about what we're aiming at with this new version of Landscape. So, like Marisa mentioned, we're splitting apart groups. Groups now, actually it doesn't look like this. It looks like this. We're taking groups and we're turning it into a few components that all fit together. Notes, talk, and gallery. These things obviously interoperate with groups, but they also interoperate with one another. You can reference a note from a gallery post, and so on. Not only that, but of course you can ship apps to this. You can extend it yourself, and those apps that you ship are interoperable with everything else. This, I think, is a very different mode of building software, especially in the cloud. What we realized with this initial suite of applications is that from a few components, you can get interesting coverage of a whole set of different types of communities. So teams, companies, squads, DAOs, tribes, I don't actually know exactly what to call this. It's something like friends and collaborators or colleagues. Right now, they're usually fragmented among a bunch of different applications that don't work together. But when you bring a small suite of functionality into one place, you can let people stay connected with tools that they can trust. It's a very different thing. So let me give you a couple of examples. For DAOs and crypto communities broadly, Landscape is powerful because it's extensible. Most of these communities have some way that they want to manage their assets, they want to manage their governance. And so we not only give you the tools for you to stay connected and coordinate, but also to make sure that you're tracking whatever it is on chain, because you can build custom applications that you share directly with that community. For companies, and I can certainly attest to this, it feels really good to use a tool where you know where the data lives. For some companies, it's actually like an essential requirement. You need to know that something is running like on-prem. Well, pretty much every time you're running a Landscape node, you know exactly where those things are. And you also know that they aren't going to just like disappear out from under you. For artists and creative people, many of whom are here, there's something very significant about using a platform that actually belongs to you. When the work that you make is incredibly important to you, it feels wrong to give it up to someone else who's probably also sort of quietly watching over you. So to have a place where you can both share your output and connect with the people that you want to be connected to is very different from doing this on like a mega platform of some kind. And then most importantly, for developers, the whole framework with which we built these individual components is something that anyone can use. Both the front-end components all the way through to the patterns through which these apps are built. These are for you to extend and build on top of. So my strong conviction is that this suite of digital basics is very powerful, that the permutations you can come up with are beyond what certainly I can think of. I expect it to expand really quickly. We already saw this happen once, and I think we'll see it happen again. Quickly, this will probably look like this, and it probably won't even fit on this screen, as Josh was showing you yesterday. I think there are two things that are important to call out. First, dApps are ridiculous. It's a terrible model of building software. It's useless. It's a standalone thing in a browser. I don't understand why people are so excited about them. I understand why blockchains are interesting. It's true. There's something powerful about crypto, sure. But I want to be able to use these things in the same place that I store my data and I communicate and collaborate with people. If you were to build these things on something like Landscape, they get vastly more interesting. So I expect that many of these things will end up migrating to Landscape. But who knows what that community will do? I have a lot of conviction in our community that comes up with things that I could have never thought of. How many of you use pals and rumors? Amazing. Yeah, that's a hit. And I think many of those are soon to come when it becomes easier and easier to develop on this thing. So I said this to you, I think, verbatim last year, and I still believe it, which is there really is no point of using a social network or sort of social software when it's centralized, when your alternative is to use a genuine social computer, something that belongs to you that you can customize. So briefly, in closing, remember this timeline. I'm very convinced that it's important to think this way. This stuff isn't going away. It's going to outlive all of us. You have to anchor your thinking far in the future. This quote is always attributed to McLuhan, and it turns out it's actually his friend. But regardless, we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. Certainly everyone here has an intuition for this fact. Our tools have started to shape us in ways that we are no longer comfortable with. They may actually be driving us completely crazy. But the tools that we build today and going forward have the potential to define the future. Because when you build in the way that I describe, these things can outlast you. And the way that we at Tlon think about building things is that we should be building things that can outlast us. Tlon may not exist at the end of that timeline, but the things that we make could. So I'm excited for you all to actually pick up that opportunity and run with it. I'm excited for you all to figure out what the future of computing actually looks like. Our goal is simply to make it possible for you to decide that for yourselves. It's wonderful to see everybody. These things are always impressive to me. I recommend you go swim in the ocean while you're here. Thanks for coming.